speaking of editing, in episode 7 you have a very sophisticated cross-cut scene between the roadhouse and Maddie's murder. Tell us a little bit about how you shaped that, because between not just the visual cutting, also the sound design really works in a very powerful way, going back and forth between the two scenes.
You know, like everybody else, my memory is really generally very sharp. That's not the issue, but it was a long time ago, and I can't remember a lot of specific things, but that was the first time that I had done a couple of small things for David before then, but I was Dwayne Dunham's assistant editor on Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart, and Dwayne, of course, started directing during the series Twin Peaks, so I moved into the position editing for David when he came to do episode 7. So you know, that scene in particular really modeled or just triggered a connection that David and I have had through all of the work we've done together, which is basically it was an intuitive process of thinking about that scene like a single piece of music, and all of the, you know, cutting back and forth from, you know, from the murder, you know, to the roadhouse, and, you know, changing from Julie Cruz singing from one song to another, and then bringing in the giant and all this stuff is just, it's you know, it just was a process that felt like composing music. So it's interesting what Tim was saying about the way Laurie, you know, uses music, but that's also the way that David and Angelo worked on all their feature films together too, which is they would sit together and compose music, but David uses that music in the mix. And, you know, just like, you know, I don't know for sure, you know, when Laurie came on and how much she worked with David, but that's exactly his pairing, was slowing it down, half-timing it, layering it, all that kind of stuff. And he and Angelo worked together in, you know, really interesting way. But so I always think about editing things that are like that are abstract in David's work, like music. It just needs to harmonize, it needs to be dissonant, it needs to flow, it needs to have fast and slow, and so that's sort of
You would consider, I would think, in this particular sequence, that sound design, the actual sounds, are kind of like the musical score as well.
Well, David always worked, you know, he never let me play the sound very much. He's very greedy and very controlling about doing the sound himself. But I have to say that the sound, particularly in the ring dropping, that whole part of your sequence was really, also really beautiful. So, you know, I was cutting with the music because it was playback and it was in the scene. So the music I would cut, but the sound, he then goes further with the sound and weaving it into the music in the mix.
Al, tell us about getting cast in the pilot and how your character was explained to you.
Well, is this on? Oh, yes. I had no idea what was going on. My agent called me and said, David Lynch has selected you to be in his new TV pilot, filming in the Seattle area. And so I went up there, and I had no script or anything. And the only thing I had to do was come out of an elevator. So, you know, that was it. Well, it turned out that they had a couple of extra days to shoot. And David said, can you stick around for a while? And I said, well, of course. And the next day, I showed up at this old, decrepit VA hospital that had been closed and fallen down. It was a pretty creepy place. And sat there, and they were setting up lights in this operating room and making it flicker, and all the people were running around doing things, and I sat there for an hour, and then another hour went by, and I got the set ready to shoot, and yeah, we're just about there. And David walked by, and I said, what am I supposed to do? Oh, he said, yeah, here, he turned to his secretary and said, go downstairs and get my notebook. There's a poem in there, and I want to have Al say this. And so she went downstairs, and about 15 minutes later came back with not only the poem, but the whole scene, which included the Fire Walk with Me poem. And he gave it to me, and about 5 minutes later came back and said, are you ready? And I said, I think I need a couple more minutes to memorize this. And so he gave me a couple more minutes, and then we went in and shot it, and it turned out pretty good. And he said, well, gee, can you stay around for another couple of days, or another day? And that's where we shot the end to the movie version of the pilot, which was released in Europe, and is also on the gold box set, where I discover Killer Bob in the basement lighting a circle of candles, and I shoot him dead. And that's the end. And as the I knew then that I was probably going to partake in the series itself. But I have, and I hate to say this to most of you guys who live in this city, but I've lived in LA, and I prefer living in the Northwest. It is a beautiful, beautiful place in the world. And actually, I think that the entire series should have been shot there. And I'm not alone in that. Bob Engels also agrees with me. But, you know, the way things are in the business, it was more suited to rent an airplane hangar in Van Nuys and do it there. But when I knew that I was going to become a recurring character, I just said I'm really not going to move to LA. Several of the cast members did do that. But I said, you know, the way airplanes are these days, you can get on an airplane and be in LA, minutes away from the studio, in 2 hours. And most of you guys have to take 2 hours to commute just where you go. So here I was within commuting time, and it worked out quite well.
Jeff and Rich, I'm dying to know what's in that bag. And I thought maybe in addition to explaining what you brought, you could tell us what some of the stranger props were you were asked to create. What were some of the most difficult? Which ones were your favorites?
Well, actually, we had probably the funnest job, and then sometimes the most stressful job too on the set, because we had to get what David asked for, or whatever the director asked for at the time. And I have actually a really special thing in this bag here that David did. Does everybody remember the black smiling body bag that was hanging, right? Smiling death bag. Well, we were in this hospital in Van Nuys, I do believe, shooting that episode, and Richard Hoover, who was our production designer, called me into this room, and David and him were in there, and David goes, Jeff, in his David Lynch voice, I need a body bag that smiles. Now that's the kind of stuff he would throw at us. Go get me 16 red rubber balls. I mean, it'd be a very odd little thing that he would ask for, you know. But this was really interesting because I really didn't know what I was going to do, because most of the bags now are zippered in an L shape. Well, I had to get one that looked like it would smile big. So what David did for me, we were in a hospital that was falling to pieces, and Richard Hoover said, why don't you draw it for us, David? And David took the ceiling tile that he found on the floor, and he said, okay, here it is. And he drew this, he said, I want it to hang, Jeff, and I want it to have a big smile, and it's going to be wet. I said, okay. So I got very lucky with the place where Rich and I have been doing a lot of our props at. It was a very old house, prop house that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. And they had some 1930s and 1940s body bags that I found upstairs. And it zipped down the middle, hence a big giant smiling bag. And then we had a black box. Does anybody remember the black box that you had to push the buttons and there was a secret compartment?
Oh, yeah.
That was a very strange prop, and it had to fall. Now, Rich was in charge of this one, so I'm going to give it over to him to explain it, but what we had to do was find a box, and David and the writers had come up with this sequence of buttons that had to push, and this drawer opened up and revealed, what was it, Rich? Was it a key or something? I don't remember. You tell it.
So, sorry, Rich, before, this isn't really a big spoiler, but we're not at those episodes, so explain what the box does.
I remember that scene.
The what now? Yes,
remember.
you were there.
Yeah, I sure was.
We had a problem because you tell the story of what happened there, but I guess, or do you want us not to?
No, I don't think that, I mean, now that we're past these episodes, I think we're pretty much in a good zone to, I mean, the revelation of Bob's identity was the one thing we were trying to hold back. I think everything else is moving.
Right, yes. Well, I think he just showed up tonight, didn't he? It looked like.
Well, I do remember that Jack Nance was holding the box, and we were rehearsing the scene, and we were very careful to urge Jack to not actually drop the box in rehearsals, because there was no reason to do that. And in fact, in the first few takes of the scene, there was no reason to drop the box because we wanted to see that. So I was actually down on my knees outside the shot, and Jack delivered his line, and he followed through and actually dropped the box. And we hadn't prepared anything for that, so it shattered into several big pieces in the first take. So we had to get the super glue out and quickly put the box back together and went on with it. But that was a definite moment of panic.
Well, see, it was actually designed, when we got the prop, it was actually designed to break, and it was designed to fall, and it was designed to do all that, but not yet. You know, so we had to just.
And Jack, bless his heart, felt terrible.
Oh yes, and Piper was in the scene too, and it was just one of those props that were hard to get to work. And we lost it in the first take, and it was, but we somehow,
Well, we do what we do.
we do what we do, we got it back together, and it made it through the scene, and somehow it shot beautifully, and it was, and that was probably one of my, and then the other thing I had to say about props was David gave us complete and utter freedom to do whatever we wanted when it came to just about anything. I went and asked him a question one day about something, and he said, Jeff, this is basically anything you want to do. You can, 40s, 50s, 30s, anything. You just have, and so we went with that, and we would get interesting pieces of stuff that we would work in the 40s, we would work in the 50s, and bring in stuff that was not in the everyday world. I mean, what people are looking at and enjoying now, we had on the screen then, so. And that's what David gave us, So complete freedom with props.
And so I felt that freedom.
Yes.